behind. I think Cottage Grove was really small, very rural.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. We may have one more presenter walking in a little bit late, but we're going to just get started because it's already past 8. I would like to introduce our speakers today, or they're going to give a little update on what's happening in their departments, and then feel free to ask some questions if you want. Todd Violante is from the Dane County Planning and Development Department. And then Dan Olson is our superintendent of schools. So I'll turn it over to you, gentlemen. Thank you for coming.
Not sure who you want first.
Whoever wants to go first.
Rock, paper, scissors.
Sure, I'll be glad to kick it off. So, all right, well, good morning, everyone. So I guess I'd like to start by giving an update where we're at with state budget. And it starts, first of all, as you're well aware, we passed our operational referendum this spring. Extremely grateful for the support of our community, in supporting that referendum. And, as you're well aware, school funding is really tied directly to what our legislature does every 2 years in their state biennial budget. And as a reminder, the budget, the 2-year period that we just finished, all school districts in the state actually had a freeze in their per pupil spending. And we were able to backfill some of that with federal funds that were intended to recover from COVID. Instead, we had to utilize those for day-to-day operations as much as we could. Certainly still are some requirements and strings attached to those funds, but that's what really put us in that position, along with basically every school district in the state. And so I think we've seen an unprecedented number of districts that have gone to operational referendum. So now that it's passed, we definitely have that financial stability that we were seeking. And the state, the legislature, Joint Finance in particular, as you know, is currently working on the state budget that's due to be approved by July 1. At this point, there's no reason that it should, be delayed beyond that. But we had to make some assumptions about what that state budget might look like in the next 2 years when we determined the dollar amount in the operational referendum. And so we were fairly conservative with those estimates. And the Joint Finance has not released any numbers yet, what they're thinking on a per pupil increase, but just what we've heard in talking to some individual legislators and so on, we think that our estimates aren't going to be real far off. So we do expect an increase of some sort, certainly not a substantial increase by any means. And so we think we're pretty well positioned moving forward. But we'll wait until that state budget's approved before we make some additional decisions moving forward. So in the meantime, the most important thing for us is staffing, right? That's what we do as a school, is we educate children. We need to have high quality teachers and support staff. And so with that, maintaining, retaining our staff has been a priority. As you're all aware, we have the same issues as many employers do. The job market is very tight. It has been now for several years. And so with that as well is, the goal of having competitive compensation for our staff, and as all staff. Teachers, of course, are we always think of it as the most important, but the support staff as well. And things like educational assistants who help support our teachers and our students with disabilities, really important position for the district, and those are ones that we still have unfilled positions. This year that it's really hard to find quality people, and so. With our budget, the priority is on compensation for our staff. The other thing that we've seen, kind of unprecedented numbers, is a number of people leaving the teaching profession. It's not so much even just competition now against other school districts, it's competition with the private sector as well. So we are in the process of negotiations with our teachers right now for next year's salaries. I would say that the negotiations are going very well, and expect that we'll get a settlement very soon. And so really excited about that. Maybe I should, well, why don't I go through everything, then we can take questions at the end. So that's the big thing with budget. The other thing that drives our budget, and that's a really important thing that we account for is our enrollment. And so we did see a slight dip in enrollment during COVID, and we have been a district that has seen steady growth over the last 10 years. And as you're aware, we just opened a new elementary school in Cottage Grove a year ago, and that was because we were over capacity in some of our buildings at that time, and then also the plan was to accommodate that future growth. And we are now seeing that we're getting back on track to those original enrollment projections. So this year alone, since the start of the school year, we've had 50 new resident students move into the district. That's a pretty high number. Put in perspective, our overall enrollment in the district is about just over 3,500, about 3,550, and so that's a pretty significant number of students that have moved into the district. Our projections for next school year is that our overall enrollment will be about 3,700, up about 150 from where we started this last school year at. We always check our enrollment. We report our enrollment to the state on the third Friday in September. That's our official enrollment count, and then those are the numbers that are used to determine our per pupil funding and so on. So that growth is a good thing when it comes to the funding formula. And as long as you have space, it definitely is something that we can accommodate, and we do have space. I think it was very thoughtful of our board and committee members as we planned out the new school that opened a year ago to accommodate that growth. The idea was it should be able to accommodate our growth for about the next 20 years if it stays on the schedule. Of course, that's an inexact science, but we're in a good place. So when we look at where that growth is coming from, it's coming entirely in the village and town of Cottage Grove. In Monona, the resident growth is staying stable, which is a good thing. I think you're well aware that we've had some turnover of housing, but in general, we're no different here than the rest of the state, that the birth rates are continuing to decline. And so just to maintain enrollment, you need new construction and new housing. If you're not building at all, then you're going to be in declining enrollment. And that's where about 2/3 of the state schools are at right now. And so with Monona, it's really been right on with our projections. We've been very steady over these last 5 years, and that should continue in the near future. In Cottage Grove, one of the things, I said we're seeing steady growth, but there's a little bit of a misperception, I think, it's particularly when I talk to the residents in Cottage Grove, that there's some of the new housing, there's also been new apartments. And I think that, the natural reaction is, well, that means a lot more kids coming in. And the reality is it's not. I've had an opportunity to connect with the people who are developing, those apartments, and there's not as many school-aged children as you might think in those areas. So we're anticipating that when they're fully at capacity, the new apartments that have gone in these last couple of years, we're talking about approximately 100 students overall for the district. So which is, not insignificant, but it's not, we can easily accommodate that. If you think about it, 4K through 12th grade, that's 14 grades divided by 100 kids, okay, that's, only a couple kids per grade level. So that's something that's pretty easy to accommodate. But, so at this point, the way things are going in Cottage Grove, that's a good thing as far as, keeping that enrollment growing slowly but steadily. And the other thing I'd like to address a little bit is our open enrollment. There's a lot of misperceptions as well about how that works. We do have a fair number of open enrollment students, meaning students who live outside of our school district that choose to enroll in. It's a state program where we are required to accept those students if we have space. Now, we're not required to hire additional teachers to accommodate those students, but based on the staffing and the space we have, if there's room in the classrooms, we have to accept those. And the reality is it's been a good thing for the district revenue-wise, because if we have a classroom, a first grade classroom, say, of 18 students, and our board policy states that our class size guidelines are 20 for first grade, you take those 2 students, there's really no additional cost to educate those kids, but then there's revenue on a per pupil basis. Right now it's about $8,500 per student. It's not enough money if it means having to necessarily add more staff or add more buildings and so on. So we're able to monitor that really closely, and so with that, as our resident enrollment continues to grow, we will then be able to scale back the number of open enrollment students that we admit so that we can keep that growth steady and stable. At Winnequa right now, in Monona, that's a pretty full elementary. There's about 620 students in 4K through 5. And we really would prefer to have that number not exceed 600. But the same thing, if we have classrooms that have room for a couple students, we can't deny those. Now, what we can do is when we place open enrollment students, we can decide where those students are placed. And right now, because we have more space in the Cottage Grove elementaries, that's where we'll place the majority of our open enrollment students, and with the goal of trying to bring the Winnequa enrollment down a little bit. But we're pretty much at capacity in that building, but we feel we can manage it through reducing the number of open enrollment moving forward and making more of a shift to the Cottage Grove schools. And then the last thing I wanted to touch on today is facilities. So we had, in addition to building a new elementary school, you might recall that last facilities referendum also provided significant funds for updating deferred maintenance at a number of our other buildings, particularly Winnequa School here in Monona. And so we feel that we're in a pretty good place right now, but that's something that can get away from you really quickly if you don't keep up with your maintenance. And so that's another really important piece as our budget, that we're really trying to stay on top of that so we don't end up with deferred maintenance again down the road. But one of the things so all of our buildings right now are in a pretty good place that way. And then the other thing that's significant or new this year is Maywood School. You might recall that we've been leasing the building to MMSD for about the last, I think it's been 11, 12 years. They have their Spanish immersion charter school, Nuestro Mundo, is located there, and they will not be renewing that lease starting for next school year. They are building a new elementary in Madison that will free up space at Frank Alice, and that's where Nuestro Mundo will move back to. And so we do have plans to utilize that building moving forward. We're going to utilize some of the space with our 18 to 21-year-old transition program. And you might wonder, well, what is that? So we have a handful of students with significant disabilities that they meet their IEP goals as 18-year-olds. They actually graduate, but then they stay with us until age 21 in transition. We support them with life skills and so on. For example, a lot of the work that we do is getting out into the workplace with job coaches and so on. But they need a home base, as well, that provides some of that time. And so the way special ed law reads is all students should be in the least restrictive environment. And for students that are in that transition, really a least restrictive environment would be not at the regular high school. It's moving on to the area that we can work with them in that transition, moving forward to their next phase of their life. So we're really excited about utilizing some of the space in Maywood for that program. And just to put it in perspective, we're talking about approximately 10 students overall, but very high need students. So with those 10 students, I think it's 5 or 6 staff members that support those students. So then the rest of the building, at this point, I don't have any details that I can report, but we are in conversations with the city, and particularly Park and Rec, about a potential agreement for their use of the building. So we're really excited about that. Hopefully that will come to fruition, and hopefully we'll have something to report more on that very soon. Okay, so I think I'll pause there and take any questions.
What about truancy? How is that? Lately, I heard that during the pandemic there was more truancy. And what is it like in Monona?
Yeah, great question. So without a question, during the pandemic, particularly when schools were closing, we were doing virtual education. That was a real challenge. And then as we reopened, there was, we talk about the needs of the students. There's no doubt that had an impact on our students. And so I would say, we're really look at this year as it's the new normal, right? We're really not back to normal, but when things like truancy and our numbers and so on, they are getting back now to more like the pre-pandemic, numbers. It's still always it has always been a challenge for some of our students, but those numbers that kind of went up during that pandemic time have now come down to where we're at pre-pandemic.
Where are you at with the open enrollment for the high school? Is every grade level have open enrollment currently at this point?
Yeah, Great question. I actually meant to touch on that, so I appreciate that. So the open enrollment, the board approves the seats by grade level. And so I kind of gave the example in a particular grade level, if the average class size is 18 and the board policy says 20, by the number of sections, that's how many seats we open up. And we are allowed to, in our formula, project forward and kind of reserve seats for potential new resident, growth, when we determine those projections. We did not open any seats at the high school for this year, and in the foreseeable future, I would expect that we would not as well. So the high school enrollment right now is about 1,150. The capacity is really about 1,300 overall. But in order to go to that capacity, we'd have to hire more staff. And so that's why right now we haven't taken open enrollment, because our class sizes are at the maximum of our board policy. So moving forward in the future, when it comes time to accommodate our residents, that it might mean adding more staff, then we might open up some open enrollment seats again. But that's a great question. Right now, I would say 4K through 12, about half of the grade levels district-wide, there's no seats available. And then on average, a lot of those elementary grades, there's 5 to 10 seats that are open. 4K and 5K are where we allow the largest numbers in, and that's the most challenging as well to project your enrollment numbers for those areas. But right now, we have 0 students in eighth grade through 12th grade right now. We do create a wait list, and with that, the open enrollment period just ended at the end of April. Then during May is when school districts are all communicating with each other, looking at student records and so on. And then it's not until the end of June that parents, we let parents know that they have a seat, and then they have until that time to accept that seat. After all that's done, then we go back and revisit our actual numbers and projections, and so at times we will have the board then revise the number of seats and sometimes open up some additional ones. Yeah.
I guess with that open enrollment, I'm just curious that basically once you get in, you're in till the end?
Yeah, so the local school districts do have some choice in that to develop their own policy. By law, school districts could require families to reapply once when they enter a new school, like if they enter middle school or high school. Our policy does not require that reapplication. So once a student is accepted, yes, then they can stay all the way through the 12th grade. The other thing that we have in our policy that I think is the right thing to do is trying to keep families together. So siblings as well are automatically admitted. The other thing, there's a large number of our open enrollment students who actually are students who are attending as residents and then move out of the district and would like them to continue on. So those students also get priority and are automatically retained. So that's also a significant number.
We're recording this for other people to watch, so if you have a question and you can speak into the microphone, then they can hear it on the recording as well. At this time, sorry, we had a little scheduling mix-up with Doug. So Doug, if you want to head up now. Todd's going to give us a quick presentation and then have some questions, and then it's you.
All right, thank you. My name is Todd Violante. I'm the director of the Dane County Planning and Development Department, and thank you for letting me be here with you. It's a pleasure. It was great hearing Dan's comments about the district, and as I'm listening, I'm thinking so much of what we do collectively in this room is driven by population growth. And from the district, obviously with enrollment growth, our work relates directly to population growth, and much of what all of you do in as I understand your various areas, is driven by that supply and demand in the market and the population that we serve. And one thing that I'd like to begin my comments with, and it relates to anybody involved in the planning realm for sure, is the context that we work in. And in Dane County, we've always had very solid population growth. Out of 72 counties in the state, we're typically growing by both absolute numbers and in terms of percentage growth, we're very high, but absolute numbers we're growing more than anywhere else in the state. We typically account for anywhere from 25 to over 30% of the state's entire population growth. So, that's the context that we're working in. In any 10-year period, any decennial census period in Dane County, historically we've been growing by about 60,000 people, or about 6,000 people per year. From 2010 to 2020, we grew by well over 70,000 people. So that's a huge influx of people. And when you think about that, trying to place the equivalent of a small village, city or village, somewhere in Dane County every year, you can think about that finite polygon of area and what that means for growth and the consumption of resources. So that really is the stage for our work in the County Planning and Development Department. Our jurisdiction is largely outside of the cities and villages, so not necessarily having a great deal of impact or involvement or influence within the city of Monona or the east side of Madison, but certainly, say, in the town of Cottage Grove, which is part of the school district. That growth is something that we're involved in. We work with the local towns on their developing comprehensive plans. We do zoning regulation in trying to manage growth in those rural areas. We do a lot in the realms of agricultural preservation and shoreline floodplain wetland protection. And we do a great deal of mapping. We have the original survey records dating back to the mid-1800s in Dane County. Our county surveyor is sort of the keeper of those things, and he protects them and maintains those records. We do a lot with geographic information systems, and the county has a great resource in the Land Information Office. They make geographic data available, and if any of your work ever involves spatial analysis, that's something the county can help provide that geographic data for. Our office, we have the county surveyors I mentioned, a GIS specialist. We maintain, if you've ever heard of Access Dane, it's a website of county land records. That's something that our staff have developed over time, working with our information management staff and maintain those records. So if you have questions about that, that would be our office. Some of the special projects, the most notable projects that, and as I was preparing for this, I was trying to think, well, what do we do that would really be of interest to people in the city of Monona or the East, I believe East Madison as well. And, it's setting that context, being aware that we're here, the resources we provide. But there's some notable projects, too, that I'll mention. One relates to affordable workforce housing. We have a shortage, an extreme shortage of affordable workforce housing. It's not just in Dane County or in Madison or the city of Monona, but it's national. And the demand for that is very high, and there's a lot of thought going into how can we prepare, and move forward as a community in promoting that housing, putting it in the right places and providing the right services for it, and enabling transportation connections and so forth. So our office, the county created a housing planner position back in the mid-20-teens, probably around 2015, and that you may have attended one of the housing summits that we've had and hosted. Those were annual events, and for the past year, beginning in September of 2021, there's an initiative called the Regional Housing Strategy that's lifted off and is well underway, and that has been compiling housing data, doing some housing analysis, looking at the supply and demand for various types of housing in the various age and socioeconomic cohorts, and then beginning to put together a strategy for how we're going to move forward collectively as a county. This is a ground-up approach as opposed to something the county's doing in a planning context. There's a great deal of involvement from most jurisdictions, towns, cities, and villages in the county. I believe Monona has a representative on the body, and as well as advocacy groups, lending institutions, developers, and there's a lot of momentum moving forward on it. So we hope to have some recommendations in place. They're being developed this summer, and hopefully by the end of August, we'll have a regional housing strategy that's out there in the community that local jurisdictions can use as a guide for their own efforts, whatever they choose for those to be. We hope it to be a compilation of ideas, and we want it to grow out of the local jurisdictions as an opportunity to share what they're doing and what may work in their communities. So that's something to keep an eye on. I'd be happy to send to Christine, if there's an email distribution list for this group, I could send a link to that website. Yeah, okay, we'll plan on that. All right, that sounds good. Another effort that's underway, that's sort of a county-wide effort, is the county board set up something called the Broadband Task Force. And what that's getting at is trying to identify where there is either no service or poor service in the county in terms of broadband access, and identify that and then develop a strategy for how we can try and get service to those areas. So there's a task force that's been in place for well over a year now. They've come up with recommendations. And there's the county hired AECOM, an engineering firm that is working with us on developing this map to supplement the Public Service Commission's map in terms of where service exists and where it doesn't exist. There are a lot of gaps in that map, and so there's been a pretty intensive effort to refine that, to identify to a greater level of detail where service exists and doesn't exist, and where the service quality isn't what is marketed by those ISPs. So we've got some very good information that's been developed by the Broadband Task Force, by the engineering consultant AECOM, and they've been identifying the range of technology options that might be available for the different areas that are needing service, and that's something that I could share the resources for as well. It might be depending on what your various areas of interest are and your areas of focus in terms of tapping into the population. I imagine there's some overlap in interest in there being that service available, and when it's not available, I imagine that's a lost opportunity from a business perspective, perhaps. So the Broadband Task Force is another countywide effort that's worth watching and keeping tabs on. And then lastly, in tandem sort of with the regional housing strategy, the county has something called an Affordable Housing Development Fund that it makes available funds for, that they put into a larger funding package for developers looking to develop affordable workforce housing. And every year there's an application cycle, there's a program, there are grant funds doled out on an annual basis, and those are county-wide. They're in cities, villages, and towns, and typically the housing that goes with that, the requirements of the program require there to be supportive services and various creative tenant screening requirements. We look at the location of the proposed development in terms of access to services, access to the community, and transportation. So I'm a member of that body, but it's a much larger county effort, and there are multiple entities that score those. And that's been a very successful program in terms of promoting affordable workforce housing throughout the county. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions about the work that we do. Rick?
Hi, Todd. You mentioned growth figures, predictions for the county. Can those be broken down at all? Do you know how that might affect different parts of the county or different communities or jurisdictions?
Yeah, there actually are. The State Department of Administration puts together population estimates. Excuse me, I should have brought some water with. That they project out, on a municipal level, what they anticipate based on past trends. And they modify those based on vehicle registrations and births and deaths and a number of different factors, but they do population growth estimates by municipality. And I believe that's to the Demographic Services Center. That's a link I could send to Christine that she could share with this group. There's also a body called the Dane County, the Capital Area Regional Planning Commission, or CARPC. They also do population growth projections by municipality. So there's a couple different sources. They use slightly similar but slightly different methods, and it can provide you with a range of growth for those communities.
Thank you. Doug, I imagine you have those too.
Yes, we do. The numbers are referenced in the city's comp plan as well, and we're actually working with the Plan Commission right now on sort of some interim updates with those numbers, with most recent census data and sort of some interim metrics as well that we can share. So that'll be coming up for discussion in the next couple of meetings.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And for every community's comprehensive plan, those are utilized. So I believe Monona has them. Madison has them, the communities that we work with. So they're readily available. One quick act, you can look at your community's comprehensive plan, and they're very likely in there. With the most recent census, many communities have gone through and are updating those projections from the 2020 data. In interim years, there's something called the American Community Survey, or the ACS data that the census provides for those in between the 10-year decennial census periods.
Well, I'm all for affordable housing and all this, but it seems like these affordable housings are turning into ghettos before they even built most of the time. And I'm wondering if there should be more restrictions and stuff like that put on the developers, because it's getting to be like that M block out there, and by on the far east side there's been 150 calls there, so I just want you to comment on that, please.
That's a big issue. Clearly, I don't know a great deal about that specific development. I read the article in the Capital Times about that, but thank you very much. That was very sweet of you. Thank you. But I think, we have to ask ourselves who's living in many of the developments that when we refer to an apartment or condominiums or smaller single-family homes that are affordable. There's a huge shortage of housing for many people in our communities, and we call it affordable and workforce housing. And that workforce component of it is significant in that these are the people that there are children, there are colleagues, there are peers in our communities that need housing, and the affordability of our housing stock is rapidly becoming out of reach for many people. So, there is this association in our minds with affordable housing or apartments and perhaps crime or property values being impacted. But it's very important to think more broadly about who is really living there. And many times these are people that are working jobs like teachers or police, fire, EMS workers. They're planners. They're anybody in our community that needs an affordable place to live. And I think you raise a point that I can only speak to from the county's perspective. For example, in the Affordable Housing Development Fund, something that we look for is not only just a housing proposal, but we're looking for supportive services that go with that. And when you have a range of different household incomes within a particular development, some may be at market rates, some might be at 80% of the median household income, some might be affordable to persons from 30 to 50% of the median household income. So for those, especially for the lower income strata, making sure that we have the services that those individuals need, whether it's transportation, daycare, counseling on how to manage household finances, assistance in alcohol, drug addiction, whatever the case may be, we all need housing. And it's how you do it, the services that are associated with that, and where it's located. And I think there are ways to do that that are constructive, that tee people up for success, that tee that development up for success, and and provide for the housing that we all need in our communities. So I think there may be that perception out there when there is a development proposal on deck, but I think we have to think very carefully about the individuals that are living there, that would be living there, that we're trying to provide housing for. One of the issues that was raised in one of the housing summits that our department promoted, Olivia Perry, she's a senior planner of our office, is the housing planner that I would put you in contact for the regional housing strategy. But in one of the housing summits, it was really focused on employers and the perspective from on the residential side of economic development. And when we don't have housing available in our communities that's affordable for the people that in our businesses that we hire, they have to travel further away to get to their jobs. If they can't live in the communities they work in, they have to travel, and that creates variability in their availability. That creates challenges for them to get to and from work. It creates vulnerabilities in our businesses and as the employers, and having an affordable stock of housing for our workforce is something that we as decision makers and policy people have to ensure, for those individuals, but for the economic benefit of our community. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that, but.
I would certainly echo a lot of the points that were made in one of the projects that I'll get onto in a minute, a workforce housing project that's been approved here in the city. It does have WEDA funding. It's receiving state funding, but also some local from the county as well. Supportive services are a key component to that. So there are a lot of elements when I'm speaking with the developer that you realize each of these funding elements has their own sort of requirements, stipulations for supportive services. The Plan Commission, reviewed those elements as well and put those in conditions of approval. And so there are a lot of checks and balances that are in place, to make this a successful project. And from a land use perspective, from a planning perspective, we're also thinking about what goes near that as well. How can this be successful? All the way from kind of the landscaping and the design of the site, all the way through to what are the adjacent uses, how close is this to transit, how close is this to other elements and things that are needed as well. So I think it's sort of the sum of all the parts are really important to that, but certainly from my perspective, and it's really access, location, design are just as important, and knowing that there are those other elements as well that can help that be a success.
I was just going to say I'll send an email with links to the regional housing strategy, the county's affordable housing development fund, the broadband task force, and then some of the resources of our departments, as well as a link to Access Dane if some of you aren't familiar with that. So I'll plan to send that to Christine.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everybody. Apologies for the miscommunication this morning on the timing. Doug Plowman here, the planning director with the city of Monona. I've got a couple updates to share. The first is actually from the mayor, that she was unable to attend. She had a conflict this morning, so passed along some updates for me to share. So I'll kind of run through these a little higher level, and then I'll get into some updates from the planning department as well. So the first one from the mayor was regarding the San Damiano, the master planning. The steering committee held their second public input meeting on April 19th at the Monona Grove High School. 3 conceptual plans for the property were presented. Following the presentation, attendees spent time reviewing displays featuring the plans with representatives from the project consultant and taking part in opportunities to provide input as well. A video recording of this presentation of the options, as well as community-wide survey regarding them, is available on the homepage of the city website at mymonona.com, and survey results and meeting input will guide the master planning committee and consultant in developing the final master plan for San Damiano. As far as the city administrator search, the former administrator Brian Gatto left for a similar position in Middleton in April of 2022. Since that time, City Finance Director Mark Hotocker has been serving as interim administrator. After being unable to come to a contract agreement with the preferred candidate after a search in the summer of 2022, it was decided to wait to reopen the search until early 2023. That was in turn delayed until after the spring election. The city reopened its search for a new administrator in late March, and the deadline was set for applications of May 1st. The mayor hopes to conduct interviews with qualified candidates within the next few weeks on that. Public safety building, the city is moving ahead with planning for a building, expanded public safety building in the parking lot behind City Hall. In the spring of 2022, the city contracted with FGM Architects to conduct a detailed site feasibility analysis ahead of any formal RFP process for architectural design services. FGM determined that it was possible to construct a building of the required size on the site with a draft plan that will make use of the existing City Hall building as well. The city plans to go to referendum seeking approval for the project in April 2024 and working in contract with MGM to conduct value engineering of that draft plan and to come up with a schematic design which will give residents a better idea of what is planned. The final update from the mayor is regarding the Monona Memorial Day Parade. The 2023 Memorial Day Parade will again take place on Memorial Day, May 29th, beginning at 10 a.m. The parade will start at Monona Grove High School and finish at Senate Middle School. The celebration is in honor of veterans, and if you'd like to sponsor, enter, or recognize a veteran, please contact Kelly Slack. I've got some information here that I can pass along, email address and phone number that can be shared for more information as well. Moving on to updates from the planning department. It's been a little while since we met, so I just wanted to give some updates on some of the projects that have been moving through the city. The first I'd like to share is the Besa development at the former Monona Garden site on Bridge and West Broadway. That project was approved. It's an interesting one in that there's ground floor retail that is sort of a live-work component, so there'll be ground floor small commercial spaces with living space above that, and I think there are around 16 of those. There's a small dedicated commercial space as well, kind of more of an office space as well, in addition to traditional apartments as well. So all of these plans are on the city website, and I'll share details so you can see the images and what they look like. That did receive a city TIF award, and they're hoping to break ground soon. So you may have seen the restaurant's been closed for a little while now. But they are hoping to break ground soon, and we're expecting, within the next few weeks, something to be there. Additionally, another project that I had mentioned, the project on East Broadway, North Point Development Corp. Is looking to put in a workforce housing project, and this is on the site known as the Whitehorse site, sort of closest to the Shell gas station there, just across the street from Menards. It's a total of 75 units that will be put in, and that's ranging from apartment units all the way through to townhome products as well. That did receive WIDA funding and also is in negotiation with the city's CDA right now on some additional TIF funding. They are also looking, to break ground pretty soon here. There are a few elements to the site that need to come together for that to take place. There's a private drive that needs to be put in. This would just be a portion of that site. There are a couple other parcels still to be considered. So the Planning Commission did approve the plans for that. They're working through some of the sort of punch list items right now to get things ready. There are a few items that I'm working with them to address. But really excited about that. Additional workforce housing coming in, and North Point has done a few projects in the Dane County area, very well-respected developer, and everybody is looking forward to seeing some movement down at the site down there as well, and what else it can bring as well. There's another development on Monona Drive, known as the Bloom development. This is encompasses the entire block, Monona, Gordon, West Dean, and Springhaven, so the sort of BMO site there, also where the Snick's Sportsman's Bar was as well. That has had the sort of Plan Commission approval process for that is twofold. The first is a general development plan, which sort of sets the parameters for the development, sort of the typical use, the general expectations for the site. That has been approved for the project, and really it's a mixed-use project. There's apartments to this. There's also rental townhomes that would be sort of facing the Gordon side of the project. The
The project also does include ground floor retail closest to Monona Drive. That includes a BMO Bank, BMO Harris Bank sort of staying at the southeast corner of that, with some additional sort of smaller retail spaces as well. So at the moment, they're looking to come through for the PIP, the Precise Implementation Plan, for consideration. That's where the specifics come in terms of the landscaping, stormwater, some of the finer details. But, you know, really, how does it align with the plan that was previously approved, and how does that sort of move forward from there? So that one is looking to move forward here, and again, there was a TIF agreement that was put in place, and that is agreed and was approved by City Council just a couple weeks ago at this point. The final, or another apartment building I wanted to reference, and I'll move on to a couple other items. One that's under consideration right now with the Plan Commission and with the city's CDA, the Community Development Authority, 5105 Monona Drive. It's the vacant parcel next to the Food Fight office building there. Developers coming through looking to put infill apartments there. There'd be a total of 45 apartment units. There's been a lot of discussion with the Plan Commission, a few different meetings they've come through for on that. At this point, I'd say the Commission is generally comfortable, and now they're working with the city's CDA in terms of additional assistance. There are some challenges on the site just with the size of it, and some what would be needed for development. So they're working with the city's CDA at this point. Another exciting development is the Rutabaga space or the former Rutabaga space on West Broadway. You'll have seen that did close. There's a new dental clinic that has received approvals to go in there. Madison Pediatric Dental and Orthodontics will be moving from River Place. They'll actually be building a new building there. They had hoped to be able to reuse what was there, but ultimately with the space needs that they had and some of the challenges with the site, they'll be developing a new dental office there. It's actually got a really nice facade, and anybody that's familiar with it, they've got sort of the kids' movie theater sort of experience inside. They'll be putting some of those elements to the facade as well. So it'll be a really nice addition and keeping a much-loved business in the city as well. So looking forward to that. And again, they are looking, I'd say, spring or summer to sort of start construction on this. So they're looking to move forward. And a couple other businesses that you may have seen sort of coming through. A couple tenants are looking to take over the former Hobby Lobby space over at Southtown. So it would be a division of the space there. It was a pretty large commercial space, so divided into three. Two of the tenants have been approved, and it would be a Five Below was one of the retail stores, and then the other was a Michael's as well, so sort of a similar use. The third space at this point is still undefined, but the landlord is actively looking for a tenant to take that. But some good news over at Southtown, and another one I know folks are very excited about is the former Angelo's restaurant. There's going to be a new Italian restaurant going in there. It received approvals for that, for the use, and it's going to be another sort of Italian sit-down, nice restaurant there as well. So good to see that space being reused, and I know a lot of folks are very excited for that. So quick run through of everything that's kind of going on at the moment and has been going on in the last few months, but certainly a lot of projects moving forward, and a lot of busy time here at the city. So happy to answer any questions. Yeah.
Any idea or update on the space behind Angelo's, the old bowling alley, if that's going to be developed or the plan can be done? Plan at all?
Yes, so no update at this point. So that did receive sort of approvals for the first phase of that. It was going to be sort of a two-phased residential building with some ground floor retail. At this point, the developer's sort of reassessing. I think there were some challenges. Obviously, it's a difficult market at this point with interest rates and construction costs. So the city's still in contact with them and sort of leaving the door open, for additional discussion. But at this point, there's nothing that's moving forward.
Follow-up questions for anyone else? No? Okay. Well, thank you all for coming once again, and thank you, TDS, for sponsoring this. As the gentleman said, I will send out a link to the recording of this and minutes, and all the information that you'll need. That should come out later this week. And if you have any questions, you know where to find me. So thank you very much, gentlemen, again for coming.
Yep, you as well.